in time because there's so many people that are bringing disease, they're bringing bombs, they're bringing drugs. There are reasons we have to secure the border, which this president's refused to do.
Might just mention, since Louie did talk about some biblical principles, my commentary today is on the Bible and immigration, because I felt some people maybe were taking a particular verse out of context, and so I set some of that. And if you are not receiving my daily commentary, you can sign up at our website, pointofview.net. Louie, just before we take a break, though, you mentioned we're not deporting them, and one of the videos I posted the other day was with our Secretary of Homeland Security, and he was on one of the Talking Head shows, and the host could never get him to use the word deport or give a percentage of deporting. Those kinds of comments, I think, give aid and comfort to more young people in some of these countries to come here, because they can't even hear and have not heard administration officials say that they're going to be deporting those that come. Some people maybe were taking a particular verse out of context, and so I set some of that. And if you are not receiving my daily commentary, you can sign up at our website, pointofview.net. Louie, just before we take a break, though, you mentioned we're not deporting them, and one of the videos I posted the other day was with our Secretary of...
your heart goes out to them. You just want to adopt every one. But the problem is that it encourages more and more people to come and would overwhelm the system. So what would be better for us to do is to put Border Patrolmen with these families, with these groups that are coming in illegally, and say, we do not want to become a third world nation like you had to flee. And the only thing that keeps us from turning into a third world nation is we follow the law. We enforce the law more fairly than any country in the world, and therefore we must follow our law. We're sorry, if you want to come in, you must apply and do it the right way. It's too unfair to others. So we're putting Border Patrolmen with you, and we're shipping you back where you came from, and we look forward to you applying the right way, like more than 1 million people a year do. That's the right thing to do, and it may seem cruel to some, but we get them back safely where they came from. That's a lot more than the drug cartels can promise when they take their $3,000 to $10,000 to bring people across the border. It's what we need to do. Enforce the law.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Representative Louie Gohmert. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. When I come back, I want to talk about why is it so difficult for us to enforce our borders. Does that have to do with the need to build more walls or to finish building the wall? What about the Endangered Species Act, and why do we have so many young people coming in, and some of those very important issues? We'll also, of course, talk about what can and should be done by Congress and by the President to address this issue. And so we will continue our conversation with Representative Louie Gohmert. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll be back with him and a little bit later with you right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
How should Christians apply biblical perspectives to the current debate about immigration? The answer to that question is not easy because it involves two conflicting issues that generate lots of emotion. On the one hand is the concern of national security and a belief that citizens and aliens alike should obey the law. On the other hand is a concern for the poor and the needy who want to come to this great country. Christians who use passages in the Old Testament to support their position need to remember that these verses applied exclusively to the theocracy and don't necessarily have a direct application to our country today. For example, Deuteronomy 31 required that all foreigners dwelling in Israel must enter into a covenant to obey God. Those that did not support God's leadership were not allowed to enter the land. Aliens in Israel were not given the same status and rights as Jews in the land. These aren't policy positions that today we would like to implement in America. The Old Testament also called for Israel to treat aliens with respect. Exodus 22 says, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." The alien was put in the same category as widows and orphans. They could receive a portion of the tithe. They had access to the gleanings in the field. It's also worth noting that these provisions did not apply to the foreigner who was temporarily in the country for work or other purposes. A key New Testament passage is Romans 13, 1-7, which teaches that government is a minister of God for you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on one who practices evil. We should expect the government to protect our borders and punish those who break our laws. The fact that thousands of children are able to walk across our border is a visible illustration that our border is not secure. If we're looking for a first priority in the immigration debate, it is border security. I would suggest that closing the border is what the U.S. government needs to do first. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Representative Louie Gohmert. If you'd like to join us, we will open up the phones a little bit later. He will have to leave us just a little bit before the end of the hour here, but we'll give you as much opportunity to interact with him and hear some of his comments. Second hour, don't forget, we have Anne Graham Lotz with us today. As I jokingly said yesterday, Louie and I will discourage you the first hour. Anne Graham Lotz and I will hopefully encourage you the second hour. And I knew you'd laugh at that, Louie. Okay, explain this. I think anybody that thinks the border is secure knows it's not when you see children literally walking across the border and then giving up to the Border Patrol. Why is that? Have we not built enough fence? Do we have a problem with the Endangered Species Act? Are we simply not patrolling the border? What's going on?
Well, first of all, let me just say about the Endangered Species Act. I discovered in 2005 and 6 when we were trying to reform it so we would actually save more species that the liberals that were pushing endangered species, it became very clear they weren't as concerned about saving endangered species as they were about the government running everything, the GRE. We were trying to do things that would help save more species, and we would get comments like, well, people shouldn't even own the land in the first place. So I think when it comes to saving the nation that is doing more for the environment, endangered species than just about almost anybody else, we need to save the nation first. And that means following the laws. And so you bring up the little children. Middle of the night, I'm out there near the Rio Grande where it's not like El Paso where it's a trickle. I mean, this is a flowing river, and it's the place where more people are coming across. And here appears 3 adult women and 5 little kids, and these are precious little kids. They just look up at you with these beautiful little faces and bright brown eyes, and they're just adorable. But we keep hearing that they're fleeing violence when the first question that's asked by the Border Patrolman is they are required to do to process, where are you coming from, and why are you coming? Well, it wasn't, we're trying to get away from violence. It wasn't because murder had peaked or was spiking somewhere they came from. It was, we wanted to give the kids a good education. And then you inquire further and you find out 2 of the fathers of some of these kids are in North Carolina, and they've got good jobs over there, apparently in the country illegally. And one's mother is actually in Miami and has a good job there. And since they got word that children were being allowed to stay in America, and that not only that, but Homeland Security and Health and Human Services would actually engage in human trafficking, aiding and abetting the lawbreakers, and get them to wherever their parents might be, with nothing more than just their word. This is where we think they are, and then we get into the business of putting them on planes, trains, buses, and sending them where they say they'd like to go. Incredible. Anyway, it's got to stop, and the way to do it is start turning people around at the border. There's no question that the two groups of 25, 27, this small group of 8, they were going to eventually be able to send word back. It's all true. They're not sending us home. We get to stay.
And so, again, we are recognizing they're putting them on buses. They're going to Delaware. They're going to Iowa. They're going all sorts of places. And as a result, the message is continually sent, even though we're going to be spending money with commercials down in those areas where young people are leaving, telling them that they'll be sent back. They're not seeing that they're being sent back. And I'm not so sure, as like at least one commentator put today, even if they are going to be deported, they might just come back again anyway. So unless you have... Go ahead.
That's already happening. And we've got people committing crimes here and being sent back, but because the border is porous, they come right back. I mean, when I was a judge, I had a guy, I think he'd had like 9 DWIs, had never been deported. He finally gets to my court, a felony court, and so I decided, well, look, if they're not going to deport him, I'm going to send him to prison. I mean, for heaven's sake, I have to consider the safety of the people in Texas. And so then back within 6 months, he's in my court. And through the interpreter, I inquire what happened. And he indicates that, he went to prison. And once we finally sent him to prison, then he was deported. And they took him to a bridge, made him walk across. And then they took off, and he came back across. And he's back there having another accident, hurting somebody, driving while intoxicated. I mean, it's a dangerous situation, but that's why some people thought it was rather haughty of me to ask the question in one of our hearings, but when I was told by an ICE agent, so we took him to the border and made him go back across, then I asked the question, did you hang around long enough to watch him come back, or did you leave immediately? There was a basis for that question.
That's just amazing. The question that certainly on the table right now that the president and his press secretary have said is, well, this is the fault of the previous administration, because you go back to 2002, we have a loophole here that says that anyone that does not come from a contiguous country, that would be Mexico, any of these other countries, has to go through a formal deportation hearing. Although some have pointed out that some of the concern goes all the way back to Bill Clinton. But once again, we see the finger pointing saying, well, if these previous administrations had dealt with this, we wouldn't have this problem. So does Congress have a role in changing that loophole so that you can deport young people a lot faster than we can right now, given the system that has been established?
Sure, we do, and we should change that. The big change came in 2008 when the Democrats controlled both houses, and they pushed through a modification for folks coming in from non-contiguous countries, and that actually ended up being shoved through the unanimous consent when there were only a handful of people on the floor. Hosea 8:4 is where God was telling Hosea why he was upset with the children of Israel, and he said in one translation, in essence, they've chosen leaders who were not my choice. Well, the great thing about democracy is it ensures people are governed no better than they deserve, and we're getting what America deserves. And we did when we elected Bill Clinton, we did when we elected George W. Bush, we did when we elected President Obama. But the problem is the humanitarian crisis was never like this under President Bush. He would never have allowed to get it to this point. There were some of us that met off the record privately with him and with Karl Rove and with Chertoff and made demands that they needed to start securing the border, and they were actually doing a better and better job. But this administration sends out word by dictum and by decree that, gee, here's the new requirements of the law. I don't like what Congress did. So if you meet these requirements, then you get to stay. Well, he can't change the law. You ask, does Congress have a role? We have the role. It's the Constitution that says that Congress is the one that has the decisions and will make these decisions over immigration or naturalization. That's Congress's job. The president's job is to create an administration that carries out the law faithfully, not as Andrew McCarthy has pointed out, this president is carrying them out faithlessly. It's time for the law to be enforced faithfully.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, let's give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. What do you think we should do in terms of enforcing the border? What about this humanitarian crisis? What about young people that have shown up at our border and now are being shuttled all over the United States with the promise that they will come back for their hearing? I think you know what that's going to mean. And how are we to address this issue? On the one hand, of course, you have the compassion and the concern that we should have to treating our fellow person, whether in this country, an alien or a citizen, with compassion, and certainly the concern we would have. But on the other hand, we have the concern as well about the rule of law. And we've talked about Romans 13:1-7, and the importance of government having an ability to secure the borders and to bear the sword and to protect us. We certainly are seeing people oftentimes focusing on the first, the compassion part, but not on the second, the conviction part and the constitutional part. So we're going to certainly give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. A couple of articles we've posted related to this today. The first one, Immigrants to Turn Texas Blue, a comment by Louie Gohmert. A second one as well about the president being in Texas and yet spending time with a fundraiser, but not ever going to the border. And the governor saying, I'm not going to just shake your hand on the tarmac. Now, apparently, there is a meeting that will take place, and I think we know pretty much what both sides are going to say since they've been pretty public about it. But again, you can find some of those very important resources there. My commentary today related to some biblical principles related to immigration, and you can find that on the website. Of course, you can also subscribe to it by clicking on that button that says Get Involved. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Representative Louie Gohmert, representing the 1st District in Texas. We'll be back with him and you right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation today. We have with us for just a little bit longer Representative Louie Gohmert. I know he'll have to go before the end of the hour, but as long as he is with us, you can ask a question or make a comment, and we'll run right out to Kentucky first. Dr. Lackey, thank you for calling today. You're on with Representative Louie Gohmert.
Well, yes, I just, as a father, a high school teacher, and as a pastor, but also now in private practice as a PhD psychologist, it's simply Psych 101, which is simply, if you want behavior to continue, you reward it. If you want behavior to cease, you must give an effective consequence. Like I received a ticket in Tampa, Florida. They had a camera on the stoplight. I didn't stop. It cost me $158. I went back last year. I was a good driver.
Yes, that's right. Louie, you've been a judge. You know about consequences. It seems to me that we have not raised the consequences of disobeying our law high enough to prevent individuals from wanting to come to the border. And then if we aren't necessarily having our Border Patrol do anything except shuttle kids and change diapers, we are going to have more of this, not less of it in the future.
Well, and it's not only that. You got drugs coming in. The drug cartels are bringing people. They're engaged in human trafficking. And while they're keeping ICE and Border Patrol occupied with some of these other things, it opens us up to more drugs. But, Doctor, I'm sure you would agree, too. You're exactly right. That's Psych 101. But one of the things that was so difficult for me as a Christian judge was to see how many times children suffer for the sins of their parents. And it would break your heart, when you send somebody to prison because they have done horrible things that required them to go off to prison, but the kids suffer. And it by the same token, though, children are often blessed as a result of the good conduct of parents. But it is a tragedy of humanity that so often kids suffer for the sins of their parents. And here, though, if we encourage and give parents the idea that, gee, all you got to do is get your kids to the border and we take care of them from there, then more and more parents are going to send them here. Or as one lady, well, I'm actually the mother's cousin, but since kids are being allowed to stay, then this was a good time to bring, the daughters, and then they would be taken to where their mom is. Well, this is the kind of thing that's being rewarded, and those rewards have got to stop. The consequences are significant enough that they're just not being enforced.
Dr. Lackey, I appreciate your phone call. One more comment.
I was just going to say, if Reagan was here, he would have got after Mexico. You can't tell me thousands of kids come all the way. By the way, I just got back from Guatemala, and all these thousands of kids going through there, and yet they'll turn around and take one of our soldiers who accidentally got there
Mexico.
And keep him there and let thousands come there. Well, anyway, that's it, and I'm 87. I live the American dream. I was born on the streets of Detroit. My father was in prison. I was raised, darn good, you're going to end up. And listen, I joined the United States Navy during World War II. It became my father. And I'll tell you, there's where it is, If they would gladly enforce good behavior, but they gave a consequence enough to change you, and they changed me, and I thank God for the military of that day, not the military today. God bless you. Hang on. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your service, and Louie, thank you for your service as well.
Well, thank you, but and I appreciate that, and I appreciate his insights. But what happened to our Marine sergeant? What should have happened was what's called a turnaround.
Yes.
And in fact, when the President Obama was saying, "Gee, we're deporting more than ever," it turns out he was not deporting anywhere close to what prior administrations had, particularly the Clinton administration. What he was doing for the first time, he just started counting turnaround as deportations. And a turnaround is what should have happened to our Marine sergeant. Instead of taking him in custody and treating him so brutally, when he says, I made a mistake, the concrete barriers wouldn't allow me to turn around, I want to turn around. Let him turn around and go back. And that's exactly what we should be doing as we catch people coming across the border or just across on our side. You do a turnaround. Just send them back and say, sorry, but you came in illegally, go back and do it the right way. But there are children being lured to their destruction, to sexual trafficking, to all kinds of horrible things. You know, there was a mass grave discovered recently, you know, and I've had Border Patrolmen tell me that they just go home and weep when they find a dead child out somewhere.
Sure.
Because the administration is not enforcing the law, so they're lured even to their detriment, and it's got to stop.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to South Carolina this time, WAGP, and you're on with Representative Louie Gohmert.
We've been challenged to do what's right and good and true and honorable, and we're not doing anything of that nature, right, true, and good. And our Lord must be so disgusted with us because we're not doing it all to Him, and we're not doing a favor to these kids, even the kids that are crossing this border. We're not being honorable and true and good to them. And I just get so disgusted with this going on, and we just must be an affront to our Lord that we're not doing this, and it just breaks my heart. We need to stand the ground. It just breaks my heart, Kirby.
Well, it certainly does. And Louie, again, there are some things Congress can do, but a lot of it gets back to encouraging the president to enforce our immigration laws. And our action item today on our website, pointofview.net, allows people, if they've never sent an email to the president, I know it may not be a lot of good, but at least it's an opportunity to express our opinion and say, Mr. President, we're asking you just to enforce the immigration laws. Forget about passing new ones. Let's enforce the ones we already have. If we did that, I think we would stem some of the tide of what we are seeing right before our very eyes.
Absolutely would. Absolutely would. And I didn't remember this, but some of the Border Patrolmen, a number of them, had pointed out separately that there was a problem with people coming in waves from Brazil, and they had gotten word that, you know, they were not being sent back, and all it took was a few families being sent back, and it stopped overnight. That's all it will take. And I am not cruel and inhumane. You know, feed them. If they're needing to turn around, you know, help them, but turn them around and send them back from where they came. And that's the only fair thing to do to all of the millions that stand in line. And some, you know, we help people trying to get visa requirements met. And sometimes it's 7 years, sometimes 10 years. What's the message to those? Oh, you should have cheated and you could have been here sooner.
Sure. You know, some of my listeners are younger, but you and I are old enough to remember Elian Gonzalez? Here was this child that came from Cuba, and then we decided as a country to send him back to Cuba, to communist Cuba, under Fidel Castro, because we said he should be with his father. Now, the same people
I didn't
that were...
the way they grabbed him. I mean, good night in the middle of the night with the SWAT team. That was all unnecessary. Scared him to death. You don't have to do that.
But, you know, again, these people that have been saying, well, we should have sent Elian Gonzalez back, are now saying, no, we just need to leave all of the children here.
That's such a great point, Kirby. Leave it to you.
Well, let's go and go to North Carolina. We'll talk to Scott. Scott, what would you like to share with our audience today?
Well, I'd like to share something that's pretty far outside the box. That we acknowledge that this problem isn't going to go away; it's only going to intensify, and that we wind up embracing this immigration of children, and that we actually fan it into greater flame and say, "Look, we want even more to come. We'll cut out these bad guys that are doing it. We'll get involved in bringing who wants to come to America." And that way, we will make up for the over 30 million children that we have murdered, and we will raise these children in our Christian homes. We'll get the churches of America to start adopting all of them and take them everywhere. And within 10 years, we will have such overwhelming numbers that we will become a Christian nation. But right now, we are a nation that probably ought to have been shelled long ago by the same fires that hit Sodom and Gomorrah for what we've done.
Well, let me take a break because there's some things you've put on the table that we need to react to, but we have one of those mandatory breaks. So we'll come back. We'll get just a few comments from Louie Gohmert before he has to go on to his next interview. He's been very gracious to give us most of this hour, and he'll say goodbye when he has to, but we are going to come back and continue your phone calls even when he has to leave. And then don't forget, in the second hour, we have Anne Graham Lotz with us as we talk about the prayer for this nation, 777, and, of course, a newly revised book, Heaven, My Father's House. So we'll certainly have a lot to look forward to today here on Point of View. And if you would like to find information about the things we've been talking about, we've posted a lot of articles and some videos on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with Representative Louie Gohmert right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we talk about immigration and the humanitarian crisis at our border. You know, Louie Gohmert, whatever happens, I know a lot of these children will not be sent back. Some of them will connect up with homes, but churches better get ready for the fact that as much as we believe this is a policy that should be implemented, I would have to say a lot of people around the table and around the country are just not convinced that we are going to deport these children, and it's going to be a crisis that we're going to have to deal with for probably a generation, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, it'll be more than a generation. You've got people that are not educated at a very good level. There are people that are in poor health. And let's face it, it's going to create problems for schools all over America where they are sent. It's going to bring down the level of the education that kids are supposed to be getting, and it's what happens when a government does not follow the law and becomes lawless itself. So the government's obligation is to its own people first, and to give them the freedom to individually follow the Beatitudes, and also to reach out to the foreigners. But you just can't throw down all the barriers and say, we don't need a wall here in Jerusalem. God expects us to use what he's given us to protect ourselves. There are people, evil people, that want to destroy this nation. And as a minister in Denton once said, just because God is in control doesn't mean he wants us to lean on our shovel and pray for a hole. We are expected, that was Tommy Nelson.
Tommy Nelson, who's in studio recently with us, Yeah.
So it's true. We have the ability to control our situation, but we have to have a government that will be lawless. And I mean, we'll observe the law and not be as lawless as this one is.
Well, that brings me to a question that I think Dwayne in Georgia would like to ask you. So, Dwayne, you have Representative Louie Gohmert on the line.
Yes, Representative Gohmert, I tell you, I get so disgusted with this president, and I've written him many times asking him to enforce the border, but this president is determined he gonna do whatever he wants to do, whether or not it serves the purpose of the American people, whether or not it's following the law or not. He don't care about the Constitution. I wanted to ask you, with so much wrong that this president is doing, why can't the House of Representatives, I say the House of Representatives because that's where most conservative Republicans are, why can't they set up a special committee to impeach him?
Well, we could do that, but we know that the Senate under Harry Reid would protect him at all costs. And so once any type of impeachment of a president is begun, it eliminates the ability to really do much of anything else on any other crushing important issues. And so if you know the outcome with the Senate is going to be to stop it in its tracks, then I think, first of all, since Eric Holder is not willing to step down and he has been the protector in chief of this president, he has been lawless himself. He's been conducting a Department of Injustice or Department of Just Us and has not been protecting America. I think he has got to be removed. And if he will not step down, I think he's the first person that should be impeached. And then it's amazing, as another caller was talking about, Psychology 101, when you enforce the law with even one, then it's amazing how much better everybody else steps in line. So I think that's where we start, and I think that's the first step that needs to be taken.
You know, the Attorney General must be your buddy, because the other day he said, I don't want you to go there, buddy, so I guess you guys are...
Yeah, he did, and to me, when somebody uses the term buddy, it means they want to be your best friend forever. So I think, in effect, the Attorney General was asking me to be his best friend forever, but anyway, I was a little surprised at his snide comments.
Yeah, don't go there. I was having fun with that. If you can stay with us a little longer, let's take one more phone call, and then I know you need to go, but I thought I'd go to Faith real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, Faith?
Hi, yes, I just want to say God bless you, and you're an honorable man, and you're doing an honorable fight. But my question is, you said about our government being for the citizens. What about these riot police that are being, saying they're going to be stationed in a lot of these cities if they stand up against these illegal immigrants coming in? It already happened in California. What can we do about that? And please tell me Boehner's not going to give him $2 billion.
Okay,
well,
real quick.
I sure hope he's not. We'll be meeting later this afternoon, and I'm certainly hoping we're not going to do that. And as far as the riot police, I tell you, I couldn't be any more shocked than I was to see federal police officers around the White House at the time of the shutdown being used to knock veterans away from the fence that were simply standing at the fence of the White House. and uniformed federal vigilante, actually they're official vigilantes in uniform, were knocking away our veterans. World War II vets, Korean vets, knocking them, shoving them away. And if they get to our veterans, the entire rest of the country needs to be worried. It's time to get a message back to the president, to this administration, and we need to do it lawfully, even though they're acting lawlessly. We can't give them a reason to invoke any kind of martial law. We can't be rioting. We've got to follow the law, and we have got to push them into doing the right thing. And again, I think that a good start would be to impeach Eric Holder, and hopefully that would get across the message. You got to start abiding by the law.
I know you got to go, so I appreciate you giving us the time today.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much, Kirby. I love visiting with you.
Well, we'll do that again. And that was Representative Louie Gohmert. And I might just encourage you to take a couple of action points. We're going to be talking with Anne Graham Lotz in just a minute about prayer. And you might be praying about this meeting because, as you just said, and you just heard him mention, he is going to be in that meeting, of course, with the very important Speaker of the House and the new majority leader in the House of Representatives, and they're going to consider whether they want to give $2 billion to this president to deal with this issue. And it's always amazing to me how when we have a crisis, then all of a sudden we need money. Because Faith was talking about the riot police. And if you go to Murrieta, California right now, it was interesting that one of the individuals who's a city council member there actually said, we have money to take them from Texas, fly them to San Diego, then bus them up to Murrieta, then turn around and ship them off to some other place. We have the money to do that, but we just don't seem to have the money to secure our borders. So as they said, that seems a little bit odd. And so before we talk about spending money for all the supposed deportations, of which we've seen very few, whether we should, if anything, deploy our resources, that's not just our finances, but our Border Patrol and all the rest, to secure the border, are some very important principles. And so we wanted to give you a chance to hear a comment from a sitting member of the Immigration Task Force, and also, of course, a member of Congress. Let me just mention for some of you that only hear the first hour that tomorrow we also will be talking with Representative Matt Salmon from Arizona, because we talked about that being the other real hot spot, and he has quite a bit to say not only about the border issues, but some of the things that have been taking place in some of these facilities, and these are pretty tragic stories as well. So there is quite a bit that we will be covering tomorrow. But in the second hour, we're going to change gears a little bit. Anne Graham Lotz will only be with us for half an hour, so this last half hour I might get into other questions you might have or comments you might have about immigration. Certainly there are a couple of other things we can talk about. Big issue right now about Costco pulling the book by Dinesh D'Souza on America. We'll talk about that if we have time. So certainly you can join the conversation on many of the topics we're going to put on the table in the second hour. But first, after we come back from the break, we're going to hear from Anne Graham Lotz, get a summary of what has been happening, as there has been a very dedicated time of prayer for this nation over the first 7 days of July. Then we want to talk about her newly revised and expanded book, Heaven, My Father's House, and we have information about her book, and a video that you can watch on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, don't forget to watch some of the videos, including our live cast, so that you can have a chance to not only hear what we do in studio, but watch what we do as well. We have all sorts of resources that are available to you, and it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk with our friend Anne Graham Lotz. That coming up right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Jesus, I love you, how I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you. Jesus, I love you, how I adore you. I can't stop thinking about you.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
As we've been saying, we now are joined by phone with Anne Graham Lotz, who is the founder and president of Angel Ministries, individual that has been so much involved in literally taking the Word of God around the world. Her Just Give Me Jesus revivals have actually been held in more than 30 cities in 12 different countries. Of course, she's a commentator, a speaker, individual married to Danny Lotz. Learned a lot more about his basketball career when I read this book, Heaven, My Father's House. And of course, we learn a tremendous amount about heaven. Anne Graham Lotz, always a delight to have you with us here on Point of View.
Kirby, thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Well, and I know you can be with us for just a few minutes, but before we get into the book, I did want to at least get a comment from you about 777, an urgent call to prayer. We have been encouraging our listeners to pray for these 7 days, the first 7 days of July. It's the day after, but I'd love to get any comments or feedback you've had about the success and the impact of all of this prayer.
You know, it's amazing, Kirby. Thank you, and thank you for your support of that. It was amazing how the Lord just gave me that assignment, and within a couple of weeks I had to have it up and running. But we had over 120,000 people that came to our website to sign up for the daily prayers. And then, as you know, we prayed every day together on the same page, so to speak. And then yesterday we prayed and fasted for 7 hours. And the feedback I've gotten is really precious, because many people, from pastors on down to lay people, say that it was personally life-transforming for them. And I think it points to a big need within the Christian community, that rather than focus on other people and, you know, all the bad things happening in our world or our politics, or, you know, that we ourselves need a fresh touch from God. And so the initial feedback I'm getting is that prayer has been answered, that God has brought a personal, individual awakening to thousands of people. And I'm praying that it'll just sweep out and become a third great awakening. But on my website, which is just my name, AnneGrahamLotz.com, I've put my thoughts for the 8th day, which is today. So, and one of them is a blog I wrote about Jericho. It's so interesting that, you know, Joshua led the children of Israel around Jericho for 7 days. He went around Jericho once a day for 7 days. The seventh day, they went around 7 times, and then they shouted, and the walls came down. And there's something biblical. It's a picture, actually, of prayer, wrapping something in prayer, as we have done in the last 7 days. And so I think in the spirit realm, we've had great victory, even though perhaps we don't see it in a corporate way at this point. I believe God called us to it, and people have responded to that call, and it's really thrilling. One of the most encouraging things for me was to see the way that ministry leaders came alongside, like yourself, you know, just came alongside and supported it and just said, we believe this is from God, and they just pulled out all the stops. And so we'll just see, there are quite a few people that have prayer on their minds this month of July, which is very interesting to me. It makes me wonder what's coming that God wants us pre-prayed for. I know we need to pray, but I think there's something, that's very significant that's getting ready to happen, and He wants us on our knees in prayer, perhaps to prevent something drastic or to avoid it or delay it or maybe just to strengthen ourselves for whatever it is.
Well, we know that this July, a lot of people have been praying almost as much as they do on the National Day of Prayer. Of course, you were individual that was heading that up as well, honorary chair. Yes. But I thought it was interesting, pray for God, to the Father, to restrain and protect and deliver His people. Pray for God the Son to be exalted and magnified. Pray for God the Holy Spirit to fall on us in a fresh way. And I would encourage every one of our listeners, if you go to our website, pointofview.net, the web link there to Anne Graham Lotz, or of course you can just type her name in, you can find it. And we also have information about the book, also the DVD that goes with it, and a video that is a short interview that you did on this book, so that as many people as possible will have that. And I wanted to move to the book real quickly because it is, of course, the classic book, but now with about 40% new and revised content. And heaven was always an important topic, but after you lost your mother and you see your father growing older, you felt that there was a need to put more content into this classic book. Well,
Kerby, it really was sort of selfish, I guess. I felt the need to wrap my own heart and mind around the hope of heaven. So I went back to the book, and just because my father is 95, and because of his age, I'm assuming he's soon to move to heaven. My husband is putting up with the advanced stages of adult 1 diabetes. He has renal failure and other things, and so I'm staying at home to care for him. And I just wanted to get back into that subject. And so as I did, and I thought, I just began to flesh out the original book. And when I contacted the publisher, he was so supportive. And so I've rewritten this book. The truth is a truth, so truth doesn't change. But stories, illustrations, great applications, it's very fresh, and it's on my mind, and not just for my father and husband, but to be honest, Kerby, when I read, and you're a news sort of program, and when I read about the 219 girls in Nigeria who were kidnapped, or those in the gulags of North Korea, like when Dennis Rodman went over there, and then one of them had escaped, and he told about the life inside those gulags, or I am reading now a book by an Arab Palestinian who pastors the largest Christian church in Jerusalem and gets persecuted from, radical Jews and radical Muslims and radical Arabs, and beaten and bombed, and I think, I just long for heaven for those people. I long for them to be safe. I long for them to be cared for and loved, and for all of their faith to be validated, for Jesus to be glorified, and for the whole world to see that the one they're profaning and blaspheming is who He claims to be, and that laying our lives down for Him is worth it 1,000 times over, not only because of who He is, but heaven is waiting for us, and He will make it up. Those people who have lost everything, have given up everything, fathers, houses, land, all the things Jesus said, and persecutions in this life, He will make it up 100 times over. And a lot of that, I think, is centered in our heavenly home, which He called my Father's house.
Well, certainly. We're going to take a break and continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Anne Graham Lotz. And what an important story for people like Miriam Ibrahim in Sudan, or we can think of Pastor Saeed Abedini in Iran and others. And certainly all of us have dealt with and will continue to deal with some kind of difficulty or suffering. When we come back, we're going to talk about the fact that Jesus went ahead to prepare a place for us and what that means, what it means to really talk about my Father's house and the fact that it's free and clear. We don't have to pay a mortgage on it, and some wonderful insights in this book, which we highly recommend that you get a copy of. And we have a link, first of all, to Anne Graham Lotz's website. We have a link to the book. We have a link to the DVD, which goes along with it. It's a great kind of study resource. 140 pages, revised and expanded, and just a reminder of, once again, the fact that now we have almost a whole new generation of young people need to hear this very important message. And for those of us that maybe have read the book before, but maybe come back and can get a fresh perspective on heaven and what it really does mean, just a great opportunity for us to learn from Anne Graham Lotz, and certainly we encourage you to sign up and find out more about her daily insights. And her course today has the 8th day, looking back over the last 7 days of prayer. 777, and even though it's the 8th day, you don't have to stop praying, but we certainly do encourage you to pray for this nation. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Anne Graham Lotz as we talk about her book, Heaven, My Father's House. We'll be back right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
How should Christians apply biblical perspectives to the current debate about immigration? The answer to that question is not easy because it involves two conflicting issues that generate lots of emotion. On the one hand is the concern of national security and a belief that citizens and aliens alike should obey the law. On the other hand is a concern for the poor and the needy who want to come to this great country. Christians who use passages in the Old Testament to support their position need to remember that these verses applied exclusively to the theocracy and don't necessarily have a direct application to our country today. For example, Deuteronomy 31 required that all foreigners dwelling in Israel must enter into a covenant to obey God. Those that did not support God's leadership were not allowed to enter the land. Aliens in Israel were not given the same status and rights as Jews in the land. These aren't policy positions that today we would like to implement in America. The Old Testament also called for Israel to treat aliens with respect. Exodus 22 says, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt." The alien was put in the same category as widows and orphans. They could receive a portion of the tithe. They had access to the gleanings in the field. It's also worth noting that these provisions did not apply to the foreigner who was temporarily in the country for work or other purposes. A key New Testament passage is Romans 13, 1-7, which teaches that government is a minister of God for you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on one who practices evil. We should expect the government to protect our borders and punish those who break our laws. The fact that thousands of children are able to walk across our border is a visible illustration that our border is not secure. If we're looking for a first priority in the immigration debate, it is border security. I would suggest that closing the border is what the U.S. government needs to do first. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes Anne Graham Lotz as we talk about her book, Heaven, My Father's House, a book that will touch your heart, encourage you in your faith, and certainly cause you to look forward to heaven. And Anne, one of the things you talk about early on is, of course, Jesus says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I'm going to prepare a place for you." And you talk about the fact that it's been prepared with love, prepared in detail, and most importantly, prepared for you.
You know, it's the sweetest thing, isn't it? When not only did he say he was preparing it for us, but Revelation 21 opens and says it's prepared as a bride is for her bridegroom. And I'm the mother of two daughters. I know what it was to prepare brides, and every detail is thought about. You know, and so when Jesus says he's preparing heaven, it's very personally prepared for you and for me. And I use the example. When my children were gone, they all went to school in another state, and when I knew they were coming home, I began to prepare the things that they enjoyed, whether it's a special home-cooked meal or an apple pie or time spent shopping or playing tennis and preparing those things so that when they walked through the door, they knew they had been expected, they were prepared for, they were welcomed because they'd come home. In fact, even now when I go up to my father's house in the western part of North Carolina, I'll walk into the kitchen, and my favorite mug is on the counter with my favorite kinds of coffee, and in the refrigerator is my favorite kind of yogurt for breakfast, and go up to my room, and there are fresh flowers beside the bed with a little note from my daddy saying, "Anne, welcome home, I love you," and all those little things are prepared so that I know that he's been thinking about me, he was expecting me, he's prepared for me, I'm welcomed because I've come home. And the same thing is true about heaven. Jesus knows the colors I like the best, the scenery I enjoy, the people I want to be with, what will make me feel when I walk through heaven's gate that it's been prepared just for me, that I'm welcomed, I've come home, I'm the Father's child. So it's a place that's personally prepared just for you and just for me.
In your book, you talk about the fact that it's a home of your dreams, and certainly we've talked about the positive aspect, but let's talk about another one. No separation, no scars, certainly some very important things, and certainly no suffering. It seems to me that that's another great hope, Anne, that we can look forward to a time when there is no longer any pain or suffering or tears.
Yeah, for sure. And I was saying before the break a little bit about my husband and my father, and so when it says in Revelation 21, I think it's verse 3, and it says there'll be no more suffering, no more pain, no more crying, no more death. And so I just continued that list, because that's not a complete list. It's just the beginning of a list, all the things that cause pain. So no more adult 1 diabetes, no more Parkinson's, no more blindness or deafness, no more arthritis, no more cancer. And then you just think, no more gulags, no more prison camps, no more barbed wire, no more guns or bombs or missiles or terrorists or rapes or robberies. And you just continue that. Heaven is a safe place where you're going to feel loved and secure and welcomed forever and ever. And there's no suffering at all. In fact, the tears that were shed here, Revelation 22 says that God the Father is going to take your face in his hands. He's going to wipe the tears from your face, and there'll be no more tears in heaven. So heaven is a wonderful place where the scars that we bear in our emotions, our memories, because even if you've come to the cross and you're saved from your sin and you know you're going to heaven, you can still have memories, pain that's put scars on the inside. But when we get to heaven, everything is new. There'll be no more scars, no more memories like that. And it says in Revelation 21, no more seas, and I wasn't sure what that meant, so I just think seas separate. The oceans separate continents from each other and countries from each other and families and people from each other. And when we get to heaven, there'll be no more separation. I'll never be separated from Jesus, the Father, the Holy Spirit. And then I won't ever be separated from my loved ones who've put their faith in Jesus, and they're in heaven. So my parents, my husband, my children, my grandparents, my in-laws, the people in my little welcoming party, I like to think of them, the people that I've loved that's gone on before, and we're going to live together with them forever in our Father's house. So no more business trips, no more military deployments, no more separation at all.
In your section on a home that is safe, you talked about that. And of course, with having 3 children, 3 grandchildren, you want safety. But in there, you also talked about something besides safety, and that is it's a spacious home and a secure home, but especially spacious. I saw that you did the same thing I've done before. If you take the actual measurements in the book of Revelation of the new heaven and new earth, we're talking about huge. People have no idea how big this new heaven and this new earth will be.
Yeah. It's if you take those, and I don't know if those measurements are meant to be literal or not, but if you take them literally, they would stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rockies, from Mexico to Canada, and it's not only on a horizontal level, but vertical. So it's like a cube. And if there were 20 billion residents of heaven, every single resident would have 75 acres to himself or herself, and that's still leaving room for public parks and buildings, and it's a great big place. There haven't been 20 billion residents of Earth, since history began, so we know they're not everybody's going anyway, but so it's a great big place, and I think what John is trying to convey is the very same thing Jesus said in John 14, that there are many rooms in his Father's house, and you can feel free to invite everybody. It's not going to be too crowded. It won't be overpopulated, so you can invite everybody in your family, everybody in your listening audience, everybody actually in the world is invited to come live with Jesus forever in his Father's house.
Just before we let you go, then let's talk about how we invite those people, because I think some people say, well, I'm looking forward to heaven. And if I were to ask them, well, are you going to heaven? They'd say, well, I hope I'm going to heaven. I think I might be going to heaven. How can we be sure that we're going to heaven?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. God has invited us all to come live with him forever, but you have to RSVP to his invitation. So like when I was invited to the White House, I got the invitation, and it said you have to RSVP, and I did. I had to call, give my license number, my passport number, whatever else information they wanted. So when I got to the White House, they looked down the list, and I say, I'm Anne Graham Lotz, and they look down, they say, well, we see your name, and they open the door, and Mrs. Lotz, welcome, you can have dinner with the president. But what if I had gone to the White House and said, I've been invited, and they look down the list and say, but we don't see your name, and I say, but here's my invitation, I was invited, and they said, well, did you RSVP? And I said, no, but here's an invitation, I know the president wants me to have dinner with him, and they would say, I'm sorry, but you didn't RSVP. So God invites everybody to come live with him, but you have to RSVP, and the way you do that is by faith. You come to the cross of Jesus Christ, and you believe that Jesus died on the cross as God's sacrifice for your sin, and you confess that you're a sinner, that you need a Savior, and you claim the death of Jesus to make atonement for your sin. You tell God you're sorry, you're willing to turn away from your sin, and to be a sinner just means you're not perfect, So for me, it's very easy to confess that I'm a sinner, and just tell God I'm sorry, and ask him to forgive me, to come into my heart. I give him the control of my life, and when that happens, then he puts his Spirit within you, so you have a new life inside. You're born again into God's family. You have a right relationship with him now, which is what the Bible calls eternal life. And when it comes time for you to step into heaven or step into eternity, you go right into our Father's house because you're his child. So the only necessary requirement, this is the most amazing thing, Kirby, because we're talking about heaven.
Yes.
The only thing you have to do is to put your faith in Jesus and Jesus alone. And you just come to the cross and say, Jesus, I want you to be my Savior. I want you to forgive me of my sin. I surrender my life to you, and heaven will be your home. So it's just a no-brainer to me. Why would anybody resist that?
I don't know.
All those who are listening, just share it with your friends and your family and tell them that heaven, they can be sure. And if there's no doubt about it, and it's because Jesus has paid the price. So there's nothing more we have to do except claim Jesus Christ as our own Savior and Lord, because he's paid it all.
Let me just mention that we have a link to your website, AnneGrahamLotz.com. And if people don't know how to spell that, we have a link, so it's very easy. They can sign up, for example, for your daily devotion, certainly your newsletter. They can even get it printed if they wanted. And there's a section there on how to be sure that they are going to heaven. And as a matter of fact, if anybody has placed their faith in Jesus Christ right now, we hope that you will contact Anne Graham Lotz and go to her website and let her know. And it is always a delight to have you on the program. I know you're going on to another interview, but thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Oh, Kirby, it's been my blessing, so thank you so much. God bless you.
Anne Graham Lotz, and in this last half hour, we'll open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation if you'd like to do so. 1-800-351-1212. The book is entitled Heaven, My Father's House, and it is revised and expanded. It's the classic book, but again, just really giving this as an opportunity for a new generation to read this. It is a W Publishing Group book, which is actually an imprint of Thomas Nelson. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we again have an opportunity for you to order it online. If you would like to do so, we have it under our Point of View store, and it is relatively inexpensive. So you might want to get multiple copies, pass them out to your friends, especially if they're wondering about heaven, they're wondering about their eternal salvation. Maybe they've lost a loved one. It would be a great evangelistic book, and it's a resource that I certainly wanted to put in your hands. So in this last half hour, let's open up the phones again. Maybe some of you were going to comment in the first hour about this issue of immigration. We'll get back to that, the humanitarian crisis. That's certainly fair game. We will get back to what is happening in Costco right now, pulling the book by Dinesh D'Souza, and a couple of other very important issues that need to be addressed. And, of course, any of you have any comments about certainly Anne Graham Lotz, her book Heaven, that would be appropriate as well. So let's open up the phones. Final half hour here of an open line, 1-800-351-1212. Give us a call. We'll take those calls right after these important messages.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go out to California first and listening on KLUV. Claudia, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for having me.
We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, I'm just calling to say thank you to Anne Graham for her kind words and wisdom. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say that I just appreciate your radio station. It gives me a positive outlook in life, especially after everything that we're going through in this time with the government, the immigration, the drought, the hunger, and my family. So I just want to say thank you. And
Thank you very much. We, of course, obviously had some car noise there, and also we needed to turn your radio down, but I think we got the idea, and that is appreciate the fact that we had Anne on, and I wanted to do that from time to time because it is important in the midst of all of the issues that we're addressing these days to really have an eternal perspective. And so last week, of course, you know, we had Ron Rhodes on his book, What Happens After Life, which was, I think, is still one of the best books ever written on maybe kind of a question and answer about all the questions people have about death, dying, the rapture, and all of that. Certainly this book by Anne Graham Lotz, very inspirational book. So probably the best inspirational book I could think of in terms of heaven is this book, and it is newly revised and expanded. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, published by W Publishing, which is an imprint of Thomas Nelson. So you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have it available in our Point of View store. So let me encourage you to go there. I did mention that we have a link to her website, annegrahamlotz.com. We also have a link to the DVD that goes with this. Some of you might think about this as a teaching or a small group or Bible fellowship program because they have a DVD that goes with it. Those of you with young children, there's a children's version of Heaven, My Father's House. So let me encourage you to check that out. And perhaps the most complete book that has ever been written on heaven from especially an evangelical point of view is Randy Alcorn's book called Heaven. So while we're talking about heaven and while we're looking for an eternal perspective in the midst of all the trials and trauma and suffering and discouraging news that we talk about so often here on Point of View, do want to occasionally bring some programs that are uplifting. So, Claudia, thank you for joining us today, and hope you'll call again. Sometimes it's hard to hear with traffic noise and car noise, but it was great to have you call in, and we'll get to some more phone calls in just a minute. If you would like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. In the first hour, we spent a little bit of time talking, obviously, with Louie Gohmert about immigration. Tomorrow, we'll have Representative Matt Salmon on from Arizona, and we'll get a better look at what is happening at the Arizona border with Mexico, but more importantly, also what's happening in these camps. Some are starting to call them refugee camps, and I think it's important for us to recognize that that may be intentional as well. There is a move right now for the United Nations to actually declare these illegal children as refugees. Well, if they are considered to be refugees from a war-torn part of the world, then it becomes much easier to grant them asylum or amnesty, whatever you want to say, but asylum is the technical term. And so I think we have to pay attention to this because in some respects they are coming from areas where there has been gang violence. But as Louie Gohmert pointed out just a minute ago, when you oftentimes meet them at the border and ask them or their parents, if they happen to be with them, why did you come? Well, we wanted to come for a better education. So asylum has usually been used when, for example, an individual, as we talked about last week, escapes from North Korea and makes his or her way to the United States, or an individual that was persecuted and was going to be killed by communists in China or somewhere else, or in the case, as we have just mentioned a minute ago, the story of Miriam Ibrahim, who was married to an American, but because of that, they did not recognize that she was, number one, illegally married, so she was going to receive 100 lashes, which would probably have killed her, but then she was going to be executed because she had changed her religion. And so if indeed she makes it to the United States, which we hope that she will in light of all the things that have unfolded over the last 2 weeks, she would be granted asylum, although that really isn't as necessary in that case because she's married to an American. But these are attempts right now to sort of redefine the terms. And so we need to pay attention to this issue of immigration. And for those of you that receive my commentary, I did my commentary today on the subject of the Bible and immigration. And the reason for that is we do need to think biblically about each one of these issues, but I find sometimes when we get into this issue of immigration, people sometimes will wrench a verse out of context. And I point out that oftentimes when people will pull a verse out of the Old Testament, well, you have to put this in the context of the fact that these passages in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, which is where most of the statements about aliens and sojourners in the land are made, are specifically given to the Old Testament theocracy. And I point out in the commentary, for example, that if you wanted to use those verses, you have to be careful because it would take you in a direction I think most Americans wouldn't want to go anyway. Because in Deuteronomy 31, for example, it required that all foreigners enter into a covenant with God. Well, what would that mean? I mean, we're not entering into a covenant with God now in America. Might be a good idea, but we're not. Some people might say, well, maybe we modify that they have to support the Constitution. Well, that's not exactly what that was there. And as a matter of fact, those who did not support God's leadership in the theocracy could not enter the land. So if you did not accept that biblical perspective, that Old Testament perspective, you were not allowed. Then even if you were allowed into the land, aliens in the land, according to Deuteronomy 1 and Numbers 15, were not given the same status and the same rights as other Jews in the land. And so, again, is that what we want in the United States? Well, of course not. So oftentimes people will pull out just the verses that have to do with not mistreating those who are orphans, those who are widows, those who are foreigners, those who are sojourners, those who are aliens. Certainly Exodus 22, probably the best example of that, is a theme verse. It says, do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. But again, the concept there is that they were then, if they were foreigners, put in the category as widows and orphans, which meant that they were perhaps eligible for the tithe. They could use the gleaning laws and a few things like that in Deuteronomy 24. But again, these only applied to those who were, in a sense, residents in the land who accepted God's covenant. Foreigners who were temporarily in the land were not given any of those particular rights. Again, I don't think that's what we're calling for in the United States. So I think we have to be very careful of pulling a particular verse out of the Old Testament and saying, well, this is what we should do now today in America, because the context, of course, was the Old Testament theocracy. But on the other hand, when we come to the New Testament, these principles do apply to those of us in this church age, and certainly the key passage there would be Romans 13, 1-7. And you heard Louie Gohmert talk about that just a minute ago, saying that government is a minister of God for you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing, because it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Now, we can talk a lot about what that sword meant, but certainly the sword was understood in that time, in Romans' time, in that time in which you had the New Testament being written, as implying two things. Number one, the sword was used by the Roman soldiers, and that was to protect the Roman Empire. So certainly the idea of the sword was to protect its sovereignty and to protect the nation. And so certainly that concept that the Apostle Paul is talking about is the need for government to protect us from foreign invaders or from any kind of invasion. And certainly one aspect of that certainly is border security, which I think we're now seeing has not taken place. The other aspect of that sword is the actual Greek word for sword was the two-edged sword that was used for execution. And I think it also implies, as it talks about there, that if you are an avenger who brings wrath on those who practices evil, if you do what is evil, be afraid. But if you do what is good, then certainly you have no fear. And so the concept there is, again, government is not only given the permission and the responsibility to protect the borders, but also to execute justice within those borders. So a couple of things that are in this particular passages that I put together on the Bible and immigration. And if you don't receive my daily commentary, we're glad to send it to you. It airs on many of the stations that carry this program and many other stations that do not carry this program. It has such a wide exposure. But if you'd like to receive it, it is very simple, because all you really need to do is go to our website, pointofview.net, go to the button that says Get Involved, just give the email and put a check mark on my daily commentary. I'll be glad to send it to you, and it's something that you can read every morning as we send it out. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, I'd love to get some more of your comments. If you'd like to join our discussion, 1-800-351-1212.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back to a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us real quickly, 1-800-351-1212. Let me look ahead. One of the things that I try to do from time to time is give you a view of the future. I don't claim to be a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but you can see some trends. And if you've been around long enough, you begin to see where we might actually go in this immigration debate. And perhaps a good way to illustrate this is to go back to a phenomenon that happened a few years ago. If you were to look at the border between the United States and Mexico over south of San Diego, kind of near Tijuana, what would happen every once in a while if young people wanted to get into the border is they would literally run across the bridge. And you would think, well, then the Border Patrol would catch them. But what they would do is they would get a mass of kids, a couple of dozen, that would all run at once across the bridge into the United States. Well, you're going to catch one or two, but when you have that many flooding in simultaneously, the odds were that most of those young people would make it into the country and then go see if they could find some job in the underground economy and survive. If you've ever seen that, and just go on YouTube, you've got all sorts of pictures of that. This illustrates exactly what is taking place right now, but it's sort of a microcosm of what's happening. You had a mass of people coming in through the Tucson area in Arizona. We'll talk about that tomorrow with Representative Matt Salmon. Now you have a mass of people coming through the McAllen corridor, if you will, as we talked about today with Representative Louie Gohmert. But wherever they come in, they're flooding the system, and a system is simply incapable of actually dealing with that workload. Let me give you some basic numbers. There are 15,000 employees in the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, but that includes people that are sitting behind desks all over the country. When you get down to really who are the ICE agents, there's 7,000. Okay, do the numbers. Just right now, they've talked about probably 3 million that have come over our border, but add that just to the kids alone, and we're talking about, okay, we have probably are going to have pretty close to 60,000 children coming across our border. And at first, of course, they're being handled by Border Patrol. And these are individuals that thought they were going to secure the border. They didn't sign up to changing diapers on kids and feeding kids and shuttling them to refugee bases. But you can see the problem almost instantaneously of a system that isn't even big enough to handle this kind of influx when it's already trying to handle all the other issues that ICE has been dealing with for years. We can, of course, as we talked about with Louie Gohmert, certainly change some of the loopholes in the laws going back to 2002. And I thought it was interesting. I appreciate Louie Gohmert pointing out the fact that, yes, that happened under the Bush administration, but was passed by a Democratic Congress. So, you know, if you're looking for people to point fingers to, I don't know that you want to point fingers to the president, but okay. And then, of course, the earlier piece of legislation was passed under the Clinton administration. And so certainly we can bring about some of those changes because of the need to maybe have a faster processing. But you can begin to see the problem that we are dealing with right now because there are just simply too many people to process, and we don't simply have enough manpower, if you will, to address that issue. Well, sooner or later, those individuals who stay, whether it's families, children of families, or whatever, are going to apply for certain kinds of benefits. Because if they come as children and then find some relative who is either considered a citizen or at least is a de facto citizen that nobody's checked out, they're going to put a more significant strain on some of our resources. And one of the things that I mentioned yesterday is the fact that America now has reached a tipping point. Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's been on this program with us many times before, his article in Forbes magazine points out that when you start adding in the about 7 million Americans who have signed up for Obamacare taxpayer-provided subsidies, and you add that to about 3 million, maybe 4 million who have signed up for Medicaid, that brings the total up to 161 million, maybe 162 million Americans who are now getting government subsidies. And that means you now have, if you run the numbers, about 52% of households that receive benefits from the government. Now, again, let me give the disclaimer I gave yesterday. Some of the individuals receiving those benefits deserve those benefits. They're people that are seniors, 42 million of them, for example, seniors receiving Social Security and Medicare, and they paid into the system faithfully. They deserved what they are receiving now. Others have provided service in the military. They've provided service in the government and all of the rest. But the bottom line is, you now have a situation in which now a majority receive benefits, and they're going to have as their best vested interest to get more benefits. In other words, if you're going to try to reduce government spending, you certainly are not going to necessarily be able to depend on those people whose livelihood depends on more government spending. Well, you add these massive individuals and you move far beyond the tipping point, and as a result end up with a country that doesn't look anything like the country that most of us grew up expecting. Let's open up for some phones, get some comments that you might have here, and we'll go to Ricardo in Texas. Ricardo, what you want to share with us today?
No, my share is that I believe it's just a clue or hunch that I think that all this immigration dumping of children at the border areas is just another tactic, diverted tactic by sleazy operatives that are changing and diverting the issues from the VA scandal. It's just a hunch that I have. I don't know. It's just that I believe that that's what's happening.
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, I don't think the people in Washington can control this, but I think what you say has implications, and also certainly it's I think it puts us in a more vulnerable situation because some of these young people coming across, most of them probably just coming across because they want a better life, but some are OTMs that mean other than Mexican, and they're tied into the drug cartels, so they could end up being drug runners. Some of them might even be in some way or another interested in working with terrorist organizations. I recognize that's only a small percentage, a very insignificant one, but when you add that by tens of thousands, only takes a few to bring some disruption. So there are major concerns that we certainly can and should raise about this. And my commentary on Monday pointed out that you're starting to get a pushback from all sorts of parts of the country, from Virginia, the story I told about yesterday on my commentary, to California, on the other hand, in which communities are saying, wait a minute, this is a safety issue. We can't put all these kids, some up to the age of 17, in a facility, a warehouse, a defunct college without much adult supervision. As we talked about with Louie Gohmert, we can't have these people bringing in some diseases. We have a whole population that's been vaccinated. Now you bring in unvaccinated individuals that have tuberculosis and dengue fever. They have various diseases we haven't had to deal with in some time, like measles and mumps and chickenpox. You can see the possible implications. So, Ricardo, I appreciate your phone call. We're just simply out of time, and we're going to spend some time tomorrow revisiting this issue initially because we have with us Representative Matt Salmon, and I think you will appreciate his commentary, and we'll hear from him and then open up for some questions that you might have. And then in the second hour, we're going to have Diane Pattison. She's been with us before, and she and Sandra Crawford Williamson will be in studio as we talk about reaching out to young women that are in the business world. So we're going to continue looking at all sorts of issues, but certainly keeping an eye on what is happening on this immigration crisis, this humanitarian crisis at our border. Just before we go, let me mention that our first couple of articles here today deal with immigration. Two that are quotes from Louie Gohmert, a third one about Rick Perry and his comments to the governor of the state of Texas. Then we also have a very good video that you can watch with Anne Graham Lotz. I would encourage you to watch it. Hit that share button and put it on your Facebook page or your blog. And we also are making available her book in case you do not find it in your local bookstore. And it's all available at the website pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Hope that you have a good day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.